Hello and welcome back. So in this episode we're going to give the enemy health and we're going to start damaging them with the turrets. So why don't we start off by creating a new script, and we're going to just call this health, and I'm just going to drop that on the enemy like so, and double click it to open up MonoDevelop, and I'm just hitting Control X to delete lines of code and enter to format this. Now I'm going to create a new variable for the health, so we'll call this public float health. And I don't think we need a start or an update method here. We will need a take damage method, and we want to make this public float, and actually void public void take damage, and it will receive a float amount. Alright, so in a different script we can just call take damage and pass in a number, right? So we'll just be calling this method, and it's going to take that amount and subtract it from the health. Pretty straightforward. So why don't we do that in laser tower? Now in our update method we check if we should be firing, and if we have a target. If we do, we activate the laser. And so at this point, laser is active, and we are rotating toward enemy. So why don't we check if we're hitting an enemy. And so this is going to fire a raycast and damage enemy. Now this is happening every single frame, so we don't want to do anything too processing intensive, and if we can find any way to make this faster, this is a good place to optimize things, because you don't want to do like a lot of calculations 60 times a second. So we're going to create an object of type array, and it's going to get the transform.position and transform.forward. So these are both vectors. There's the center of the eye for the laser and the forward direction of the laser. Now we're going to need a raycast hit, and this is just an object that we're going to store values in. So built into Unity there's a physics class, and so that gives you properties and helper methods for doing physics operations. So we're going to use that, and we're going to use the raycast method. And that accepts a ray and a hit. And so the out keyword tells us that we want this value to come out of this method. And then we're going to set the max distance to 100, and we're going to give it a layer mask. So let's create that up here. Public layer mask. Copy and paste that down. Alright, so what this is going to do, it's going to start at the center of the eye, which is here, and it's going to go forward whatever direction the eye is facing by 100 units. Whatever it finds, it's going to pass back into this hit object, which is here. And we're only going to look for things determined by this layer mask. So now, if we search for eye, now all of these towers have a layer mask component, and we're just going to click on enemy. Oh, and actually, I might not have done that on camera. So if you don't have that, make sure you go up to layer here, click on that and add layer. And then mine is layer 8. I just typed enemy. And then, whoops, in your hierarchy, click on the enemy and put him on the enemy layer. Now, once that's done, go back to the eye. Yeah, okay. So now we should have the layer mask set to only look for the enemy. Save the scene, and now go back to the code. And we'll just print hit. So now if we hit play, there's nothing aiming at him yet, and then this one turns, and now there's a bunch of guys aiming at him, so they're all pointing hit. Now, all we need to do, and then since we used a layer mask, we're guaranteed to hit an enemy. We're not going to hit anything else because they're excluded by the mask. So whatever we hit, it's going to have an enemy health component. So why don't we get a reference to that? And now this is a little bit difficult because whatever we hit is going to be in this hit object, but we're not really sure what's included in that. Like that has a collider, the point that we hit, a rigid body. There's no reference to a game object. There's a reference to the transform. So this is what we're going to use to reference what we hit. And then from there we can say get component. And we want to get a component of type health. And now that we have a reference to the health, we can just say take damage. And we'll pass in whatever the damage is set to. Save that. And now in the hierarchy, search for I again. And grab all of those, and then make sure that something is here for damage. Because by default, this is probably set to 0. So I'm going to set this to 1. And save. And then I'll hit the X to clear my search. So now that should work. So go back to health, and while we're here, we'll just print out the new health value. And play. And right away he's at like -300. So we need to make sure that he has health. So by default he has 0 health. So let's give him 100. Save that. And now there's a problem here because this is dependent on frame rate. So if someone has a nice computer, they might be running at like 60 or 90 frames per second. And so that's how fast damage is going to be applied. So if your turret does 3 damage, like 60 times a second, that's going to be a lot of damage going out. Whereas if someone has a bad computer and it's running at like 10 frames per second, they're putting out a lot less damage. So that actually like hinders that player. So we don't want this to be completely dependent on frame rate. So we're going to create a variable, public float fire rate. And by default, I'll just set this to like 0.2. And then public float fire cooldown. And this will just be like a helper variable. So I'm going to copy this, save, and I'm going to go down to here. If time.time is greater than fire cooldown, do everything in these brackets. And we're going to set fire cooldown to time.time plus fire rate. So a lower value here is better. So right now they're firing every 0.2 seconds. Essentially, when they try to damage the enemy, take the current time, add 0.2 seconds to it, and then once time is greater than the current time plus 0.2 seconds, we'll fire again. So that should slow down the damage output, and it should normalize it so that it's not dependent on frame rate. And now you can see he's taking damage much more slowly. And now you can see right as he made it to the end, he went down to -4. So we actually need to kill the enemy. And so in the health class, why don't we create a new method called die, public void die. And when we damage him, if health less than 1, die. And then later, if we want to, we can add some sort of death animation or some sort of explosion here. But for now, we're just going to say destroy game object. So, oh, how did that happen? Die. There we go. So now he should die right as he reaches the end of the track. Awesome. Oh, okay, so things exploded, and it looks like that's because the targeting script is trying to figure out the distance. So every single frame, this turret says, okay, how far am I from the target? If I'm within a certain range, I'm going to fire. Well, he's trying to calculate the distance, but there is no enemy. We killed it, and so we're getting an error there because we're trying to reference something that doesn't exist. So we can fix that in the next video. I'll see you guys next time.